Is there a strong case for the national state of disaster to be ended today?
Well, I think it's a challenging question because there's two aspects to it. One is if you want a lot of the regulations to stay from the national state of disaster about things like mask wearing and indoor restrictions, for example, then it's challenging because you've got to move a lot of those regulations across to the Health Act or to the sort of the non-state of disaster style, and that's what the government's trying to do. I think it might be a little bit more complicated, or a little bit overcomplicated rather, because I actually think that there's no longer a justification for most of those restrictions in the first place. And so I would recommend that the state of disaster is ended, but I think it's easier to do if you don't try and bring across those restrictions in the first place.
Yeah, and I mean, government doesn't seem to be in agreement on how to manage COVID-19 without the national state of disaster. And my understanding is, as you say, they want the health department to have some regulatory authority. But if they're still, I mean, they still haven't worked on those new regulations and they're not gazetted, and if they're not ready today, then we're likely to see another extension.
I think that's right. Sadly, I mean, I don't have any specific insights into it, but my understanding as well is that it'll probably be extended, unfortunately, for at least another month.
How do you think government can drop restrictions without that leading to a huge spike in infections? I mean, our vaccination numbers are still not where we want them to be.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the difference is that we have a lot of immunity in the country, even if we don't have a huge amount of vaccination. And that's because the immunity can come from vaccination, which is obviously the safest way of getting it, but also from past infection. And we know that probably around 80% now, after Omicron wave has hit, of South Africans have had COVID, which is an astonishingly high number and led to a lot of deaths, but it does mean there's a lot of immunity around. So I do think that looking at the vaccination rate alone is a bit misleading because we have a lot more immunity. And for that reason, and we saw that with the Omicron wave, the immunity really protected us. It was a little bit milder intrinsically, but we did see that the majority of the reason why we didn't see a huge wave of hospitalizations and deaths in Omicron, despite a huge caseload, is that there's immunity around. And I think we need to take that as our cue and understand that we're in a different phase of the epidemic where we have a lot more immunity and where subsequent waves are unlikely, not impossible because we can't predict the future, but unlikely to cause large amounts of death and hospitalizations.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.